The sharp metallic click of the airplane door unlocking echoed, and in that instant, a seemingly small mistake set off a storm that could sweep away the careers of an entire flight crew. They saw a black woman, dressed simply, and in a single glance they assigned her a place beneath where she truly belonged. They had no idea that in dismissing her, they had just cast aside their own future. In her soft black sweater, dark grey trousers, and plain leather shoes, Amara Ellison looked like a university professor heading to a conference. None of them imagined that this 46-year-old woman could, with a single phone call, shake an entire corporation. But in truth, she was the new owner of Sky Lux Airlines, a fact no one on that plane had yet realized. Outside the lounge windows, planes taxied one after another, the roar of Boeing engines pounding like war drums before a battle. While other passengers tapped their watches in impatience, Amara sat still, her gaze fixed on the supply trucks scurrying like ants. Her heart was calm, but beneath that composure was a razor-sharp mind, analyzing every procedure, every weakness in the system. To her, every delay was not merely an inconvenience, but a signal, a warning of a deeper cultural illness. She had no bodyguards, no assistants in tow, only a worn leather bag, holding a thick contract and a tablet full of strategy notes. That simple image only reinforced the assumptions in the eyes that glanced past her. This person isn't important. But they could not know that her simplicity had often concealed the immense power she carried. When the loudspeaker announced, "Skylux Flight 718 to New York, first-class passengers may now board," Amara rose to her feet. Her steps were unhurried, steady. At the gate, Ethan Morales, the young agent, smiled warmly as he scanned her ticket. "Welcome aboard, Seat 1A. We hope you have a comfortable flight." Amara smiled back. It would be the only moment that day when she was treated as a true first-class passenger. But the atmosphere shifted the moment she stepped into the cabin. Two flight attendants chatting quietly stopped mid-sentence. One, young and nervous, her name tag reading Lila Jensen, looked uneasy. The other, Karen Doyle, with her sharp blonde bob, gave Amara a sweeping look from head to toe. It was not a look of welcome, but of judgment. "Your ticket?" Karen asked, her voice cold as steel, stopping Amara at the entryway. Amara held up her phone, the screen glowing with the clear assignment. "Seat 1A. "The gate has already confirmed it," she said, her voice calm. Karen narrowed her eyes, her lips pressing into a tight, forced smile. "There must be a system error. First class is full today. Economy is down that aisle to the right." In that instant, Amara's heartbeat dipped. The familiar sting returned. The feeling of being excluded, of being pushed aside from a place already rightfully hers. It was the same as years ago, when she was the only black student in an Ivy League lecture hall, bearing the weight of skeptical eyes with every step she took. But she was no longer that young woman, powerless and alone. She was now the owner of the very skies they were meant to serve. Amara did not frown, did not raise her voice. She only gave a faint smile. "My ticket says 1A. I will sit in the seat I paid for." The words floated lightly, but within the narrow cabin they landed like an earthquake. Karen had no idea that the woman before her was not just a difficult passenger. She was someone who could rewrite the fate of everyone standing there. The first-class cabin of Skylux, designed to be a sanctuary of luxury in the sky, transformed the moment Amara was stopped at the entrance. It became a stage of tension, where every eye followed her smallest gesture. Karen Doyle, the senior flight attendant with a face carved in ice, remained firmly blocking the aisle. In her grey-blue eyes, Amara was no longer a passenger, but a problem to be removed. "Economy is to the right," Karen repeated, her voice sharper, as if Amara's very presence here was an insult to the entire first-class cabin. Amara did not move. She stood tall, her gaze calm, her head tilted slightly as if listening. No furrowed brow, no hurried breath. But inside, an old scar stung. The scar of rejection, of suspicion, of being placed outside the boundary of worthiness. Beside Karen, Lila Jensen, a young attendant barely in her 20s, flinched and stepped back. Her hands trembled, as if instinct itself knew something was wrong. But her lips remained sealed. Fear of losing her job bound her tighter than any rope. Amara spoke gently, her tone steady. "Seat 1A, confirmed at the gate. If you don't believe me, you can scan it again." She held out her phone. The QR code glowed bright on the screen. Karen snatched it, scanning brusquely. The machine beeped, a green light flashing. The system confirmed. Seat 1A, Amara Ellison. For a second, Karen's face froze, but instead of apologizing, she flicked her hand dismissively, her voice clipped. "This system malfunctions all the time. Seat 1A is already occupied. You are holding up boarding. Please move to another cabin immediately." The air thickened. Passengers behind began to murmur. An older man cleared his throat in annoyance. A young woman peeked over her sunglasses with a sigh of impatience. They didn't care who was right or wrong. They only saw an obstacle. At that moment, Gregory Shaw, the 55-year-old purser, appeared. He carried himself with calm authority, but his eyes had already accepted Karen's version of the story. He didn't ask Amara anything, didn't check her ticket. He simply nodded. "Ma'am, please return to the gate for clarification. We cannot delay the flight for one passenger." The word sounded polite, but cut like a double-edged blade. In Gregory's eyes, Amara was not a valued customer, but a burden to be removed as quickly as possible. Amara looked at each face, Karen's cold contempt, Gregory's weary complicity, Lila's bowed head of fear. And in that instant, she understood. This was not about a seat. It was about a cultural rot eating away at the company she had just bought. She drew in a slow breath. Her words came quiet, but strong as steel. "No. We will resolve this here. Right now." A heartbeat of silence. The entire cabin froze. Passengers frowned. A few raised their phones to record discreetly. None of them knew they were capturing the opening moments of the greatest shock in Skylux history. Karen lifted her chin, her eyes flashing with defiance. She was used to wielding authority, to making passengers bow their heads in shame. But before her stood a woman who did not flinch, whose gaze was steady and deep, as though nothing in the world could shake her. And in Amara's mind, one thought rang clear. This was no longer a trip to New York. This was a test. And they had already failed at the cabin door. The air in the first-class cabin thickened like a dense fog. Every gaze locked on Amara, waiting to see if this woman would retreat or continue being a so-called disturbance. But Amara did not waver. She moved past Karen Doyle, her shoulders straight, each step calm yet resolute, as if the very floor of the aircraft belonged to her. Karen hurried after her, her sharp voice slicing through the cabin. "You cannot just walk in here. That seat belongs to a platinum passenger. You are not allowed to sit there." But Amara did not answer. She walked deeper into the cabin, her dark eyes sweeping over the rows of seats. Then she stopped. Seat 1A, the most coveted spot in the cabin, by the aisle, stood empty. The pillow and blanket were still wrapped in plastic, the light above casting a glow on the polished leather surface. There was no sign anyone had occupied it. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. The man in seat 1B, middle-aged in a wrinkled shirt, glanced up from his phone, the corner of his mouth curling into a half-smile. He was clearly enjoying the free drama. Amara stood beside the empty seat, turning back to face Karen and Gregory. She did not need to speak. The chair itself was proof, clearer than any argument. Karen's face flushed red. Her arrogance, usually hard as steel, cracked. Yet instead of admitting fault, she forced out another lie, her voice tight but sharp. "This seat is reserved for a VIP who requires extra space. She pointed toward the man in 1B, needs the room. We are holding it for him." The man snorted, raising his eyebrows. "Me? No. One seat is plenty." He lowered his head again, scrolling his phone, leaving Karen stranded in her own embarrassment. A ripple of murmurs spread from the passengers behind. Some frowned in irritation. Others let out quiet chuckles. The veil of deceit had been torn apart before their eyes. Gregory Shaw, the seasoned purser, tried to salvage control. He stepped forward, his voice heavy with authority. "Ma'am, please step outside so we can discuss this. You are disrupting the boarding process. If you refuse, we will have to notify the captain." Amara turned, her eyes deep and cold as stone. Her voice dropped low, a whisper sharp enough to slice through the air. "Am I disrupting, or are you trying to cover up what is wrong?" The question cut through like an invisible blade. Chloe, the young flight attendant, shivered, her eyes glistening with tears because she knew the truth. But her lips stayed sealed, silence binding her to safety. Passengers began pulling out their phones to record. Each press of a screen became evidence, another eye trained on the crew. Karen clenched her fists, hissing through her teeth. "Enough! You are now a security threat." Amara did not respond. She simply laid her hand gently on the armrest of seat 1A, as if marking it with her presence. And in that moment, a harsh truth echoed like a warning bell in her mind. They did not see her as a passenger. They saw her as an intruder unworthy of crossing this boundary. But soon, they would learn, the very outsider they tried to push away was the one who held the power to decide their fate. The whispers in the first-class cabin grew heavier, like an undercurrent about to erupt. Some passengers were irritated at the delay, others amused as they filmed the drama to upload online. But for the crew, every passing second was another step toward losing control. Purser Gregory Shaw glanced at Karen Doyle. His eyes no longer held the certainty of a leader, but the desperate plea of someone drowning. Karen, her face flushed red, tried to keep her voice sharp as a blade. "We cannot allow this passenger to continue causing disruption. Gregory, call the captain now." The cockpit door swung open. Captain Richard Hale, 58 years old, stepped out. Tall and impling, his neatly cut silver hair and stern gait gave him the presence of a general accustomed to issuing orders and expecting obedience. The entire cabin fell silent, as if his arrival alone carried absolute authority. "What is going on here?" His voice was deep, commanding. Karen rushed forward, her tone dripping with drama. "Captain, this passenger is deliberately occupying a seat that does not belong to her, refusing to move and obstructing the boarding process. We have explained multiple times, but she refuses to cooperate." Captain Hale turned his gaze on Amara. It was not the look of someone seeking understanding, but the assessing glare of someone deciding, problem or no problem. And in a single breath, he had already labeled her. His voice rang out, each word striking like a hammer on steel. "Ma'am, you have two choices. 1. Accept the seat assigned to you in Economy Plus. 2. Disembark this aircraft and wait for another flight. I need your answer now. We cannot allow this entire flight to be delayed." The words accept and disembark dropped into the heavy air, thickening the atmosphere even further. A passenger exhaled loudly behind. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked at Amara with a mix of curiosity and pity. Gregory sighed in relief, as though the weight had been lifted from his shoulders onto the captain's. Karen smirked, her lips curling with satisfaction, convinced that the woman who did not belong here would finally be forced to yield. Amara remained still, her hand resting on the armrest of seat 1A. In that moment, she did not only hear the captain's voice. She heard echoes from the past, moments when she had been denied opportunities, when she had been forced to prove she was worthy. But today was different. She was no longer someone seeking a place. She was the owner of the very plane they were standing in. Her eyes slowly lifted to meet Captain Hale's. Calm yet burning, like embers glowing under ash. Her voice was quiet, but each word cut through the silence like a blade. "I understand the choices you have given me, and I understand well the authority you think you hold." Karen frowned, Gregory shifted uneasily, and Captain Hale tilted his head slightly, unaware he had just lit the fuse of a storm no one could contain. Amara calmly reached into her leather bag and pulled out a phone. Not the sleek smartphone everyone expected, but a different device, thicker, more rugged, with a slim antenna glinting under the cabin lights. A satellite phone. The silence thickened. Passengers held their breath. The crew exchanged glances, not yet comprehending. And then Amara pressed a single button. The connection clicked instantly, a faint static buzzing. Her voice rang out, sharp and precise. "Jonathan, activate code Indigo, immediately." The dry static from the satellite phone cut through the cabin like a cold blade slicing the heavy air. No one had time to grasp what code Indigo meant before the voice of Jonathan Pierce, 50 years old, Chief of Staff, came sharp and commanding over the line. "Order received. Activating immediately, Dr. Ellison." Karen blinked rapidly, sweat breaking across her forehead. Gregory Shaw stood frozen, his lips parting, but no words escaping. Captain Hale, who had always believed absolute authority in the sky belonged to him, frowned ever so slightly, yet deep in his eyes flickered a rare unease. Seconds later, the voice of air traffic control thundered through the cabin speakers, clear and cold. Skylux Flight 7118, confirm. Ground stop in effect. Jet bridge remains locked. Pushback not authorized. This is an emergency directive from headquarters. The cabin erupted in chaos. Some passengers gaped in shock. Others scrambled to film the scene on their phones. Cameras captured it all. A luxury aircraft halted at the gate, not for a technical failure, but for a single passenger. Captain Hale lunged for the interphone, his voice tight, tinged with panic. "Headquarters? Which headquarters has the authority to stop my flight?" The reply from air traffic control cut like steel. "Authority signed under Ellison. Alpha. Level priority. All flight operations suspended until direct instruction is given." The name fell like a thunderclap. Ellison. Ethan Morales, the young gate agent, rushed back into the cabin, nearly out of breath, clutching his tablet with trembling hands. His eyes widened as he read the line glowing in bold red. "Code Indigo, issued by Dr. Amara Ellison, CEO, Skylux Holdings." Ethan froze, the truth crashing down on him like a hammer. When he looked up, his gaze met the calm, steady figure of the woman, standing beside seat 1A, and in that moment, everything became clear. You are Dr. Ellison." His voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. Amara turned, nodding once. A single, quiet gesture, yet powerful enough to shatter every assumption, every lie, every sneer thrown at her from the moment she boarded. Karen staggered back a step, her face drained of color, hands clenched so tightly they turned white. Gregory bowed his head, stammering incoherently. Captain Hale stood rigid, as though shackled to his very command seat. And the passengers? They were stunned, many speechless, their phones now recording not just an argument, but the moment an airline was unmasked by its own new CEO right there on the plane. Amara lowered the phone, her voice steady, calm, but sending a chill through every spine in the cabin. "You thought I was a troublesome passenger. The truth is, I am the one who just bought this aircraft, and your future along with it." A silence fell so sharp it burned. The first-class cabin was no longer a sanctuary of soft leather seats and expensive wine. It had become a courtroom, and every word Amara spoke was a verdict. Karen swallowed hard, beginning to stammer. I didn't know." Amara cut her off, her tone slicing like a blade. "Not knowing has never been an excuse. You have just exposed the cultural disease eating away at this company. And I have a duty to cut it out." Behind them, phone cameras shook as they captured the moment power flipped in an instant. The crew who once believed they held control now stood as defendants before the judgment of the woman they had tried to dismiss. The first-class cabin was quiet, the only sound the distant hum of the engines. Dozens of phones were still pointed forward, recording every blink, every breath. But to Amara Ellison, this was no longer the luxury cabin of a flight. It had become an emergency courtroom. She stood tall, her voice steady, low, and sharp. "Let us review exactly what just happened." Her eyes locked onto Karen Doyle, the bob-haired flight attendant whose face had turned pale, her lips trembling. "Ms. Doyle," Amara said, calling her by name. Karen flinched. "Your job is to represent the Skylux brand, to welcome passengers with respect. Instead, you chose prejudice over professionalism. You told me this seat was already taken. I stood in front of an empty seat. You invented a non-existent VIP, and when the truth was clear, you doubled down with lies. That is no longer a personal mistake. That is defaming the very brand you wear on your uniform, at the door of first class." Karen stammered. I just thought—" "Enough," Amara cut her off, her voice like ice. "Thinking is your right. But when you wear this uniform, personal thoughts no longer matter. Only responsibility matters. And you betrayed it." Karen's shoulders sagged, her eyes darting wildly, searching for salvation she would not find. Amara shifted her gaze to Gregory Shaw. The 55-year-old purser, who had once carried himself with confidence, now stared down at the floor, his hands gripping the edge of his jacket. "Mr. Shaw, you were supposed to be the neutral party, the one who verified every claim, the one who protected fairness for passengers. But you never even asked to see my ticket. You chose to believe the word of your subordinate, because it was the easier path. You call that efficiency. I call it systemic cowardice." Gregory let out a faint groan, as though something had crushed his chest. Never in his life had a passenger stripped him bare like this, let alone the very CEO of his company. Then Amara turned to Captain Richard Hale, her eyes blazing like fire. "And you, Captain Hale, on paper, you hold absolute authority over this aircraft. But that authority is not a privilege. It is a burden of responsibility. Instead of investigating, you issued an ultimatum. Either economy plus or leave the plane. You turned me, a valid passenger, into a disruptive threat because you chose to believe a biased report. You forgot that safety and fairness must walk together. You chose convenience for yourself over justice for a passenger." The air grew so heavy that even passengers in the back shuddered. A man in seat 1B quickly shut off his camera and lowered his head, afraid of being pulled into the storm. Only Lila Jensen remained, the young flight attendant pressed against the wall, tears threatening to spill, her hands shaking as she clutched a tray. Amara's tone softened, no longer as sharp as when she had addressed the others. "And you, Ms. Jensen, I saw the fear in your eyes from the beginning. You knew what was happening was wrong, but you stayed silent. Silence is also a choice, and today, that choice put you in line with those who disrespected this brand." Tears streamed down Lila's face. She sobbed quietly, whispering, "I'm sorry." Amara drew in a deep breath, her voice rising, clear and resonant, like the gavel of a judge. "This is no longer about individuals. This is about a diseased culture that has rooted itself inside Skylux, and I will not allow it to survive another day." The cabin erupted in hushed murmurs. Passengers turned to one another, realizing they were witnessing not just a confrontation, but a purge unfolding in mid-air. The first-class cabin was frozen in silence, like a grand theater just before the curtain fell. Every eye was locked on the woman standing firm beside seat 1A. No one saw a modest passenger in a black sweater anymore. They saw a supreme judge and an entire flight crew trembling before the bench. Amara drew a deep breath. Her voice rose, slow and deliberate, each word landing like a verdict. Karen Doyle, Gregory Shaw, Captain Richard Hale, and you, Lila Jensen. Effective immediately. Your contracts with Skylux Airlines are terminated. Your employee badges are revoked. You no longer have the right to serve on any flight under this company. A heartbeat of silence passed. Then gasps erupted like muffled explosions. Karen staggered, her mouth falling open, her face drained, white as paper. "What? No, you can't. I've been here 15 years. She grabbed Gregory's arm for support, but Gregory himself was crumbling, eyes wide, lips moving without sound. Captain Hale clutched his pilot's cap in a trembling fist, his voice a guttural growl. "This is a passenger, not an executive. Who gave you authority?" Amara turned, her gaze cutting like a blade. "I am not a passenger. I am Amara Ellison, CEO of Skylux Holdings, the legal owner of this airline. Authority. I am the authority." The words struck like thunder. Passengers erupted in shock, some leaping to their feet, phones shaking in their hands. Each recording, each stunned stare, captured the exact moment power shifted forever. Lila Jensen broke into tears, streaks running down her young face. She stammered through sobs. "Please, please give me another chance. I was afraid. I didn't dare speak." Amara's eyes softened slightly, but her tone remained unyielding. "You already had a chance, Jensen, and you chose silence. Silence in the face of injustice is betrayal. I hope next time, wherever you work, you remember this lesson." Karen collapsed into sobs, burying her face in her hands. Gregory sank into the nearest seat, as though his strength had been drained from him. Captain Hale stood rigid, the furious eyes of a king stripped of his throne. Amara did not turn away, did not flinch. She let the truth stand raw and undeniable before everyone, because she knew that sometimes justice does not need to shout. It only needs resolve. An airport security officer boarded the plane, his footsteps echoing down the aisle, each step pounding like a drum announcing collapse. "Please, come with me," his voice firm and steady. Karen wailed, Gregory hung his head, Lila sobbed quietly. Only Captain Hale walked upright, his face flushed red, eyes blazing with fury, but powerless. Passengers shifted aside, forming a narrow path, their eyes cold, curious, even faintly satisfied. And under the harsh white light, Amara Ellison did not smile, did not revel. She simply stood, her eyes deep as a still abyss, bearing witness as a toxic culture was cut out on the spot. The cabin door swung open again, but this time it was not airport security. 3 men in disheveled suits, ties askew and breathing hard from running, rushed onto the plane. Leading them was Daniel Wu, the 54-year-old chief operating officer of Skylux, known for his calm demeanor. His face was now flushed red, sweat beading at his temples, his eyes wide with panic. Daniel nearly collapsed to his knees in front of Amara, his voice ragged and breathless. "Dr. Ellison, my God, I am so deeply sorry. This is a terrible incident. We will handle it immediately." The passengers collectively held their breath, the sight of the COO bowing before the woman who had just been thrown out of first class, sent a silent shockwave through the cabin. Every phone camera remained trained on the moment, recording every trembling detail. Amara did not move. She let Daniel spill his apologies, allowed the truth to strip away its own disguise. Then her voice cut through the air, each word sharp, cold, and deliberate. An apology cannot erase the disease that is eating away at this company. Daniel, you and the executive board will have to do far more than that. And we will begin right now, here, in front of every passenger on this plane. Daniel's face drained of color. He swallowed hard. Why, yes, understood. Amara turned, her voice steady and resonant, drilling straight into the foundation of the company. I want a full cultural audit. Every single customer complaint from the last 24 months, especially those involving bias or discrimination, will be reviewed. Each case will be disclosed. None will be hidden. Daniel nodded frantically, his hand trembling as he scribbled on his tablet. Amara continued. Second, I want a mandatory training program for the entire flight crew. Not just customer service training, but training in equity, respect, and debiasing skills. Anyone who cannot meet the new standard will have no place at Sky Lux. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances, some nodding, others pressing harder on the record button, aware they were witnessing history unfold. Amara paused, her gaze sweeping the cabin. When her eyes met the passengers, still holding their phones aloft, she raised her voice, making each word even clearer. Skylux will no longer be an airline where the power of a uniform outweighs the rights of a passenger. From today forward, anyone wearing this uniform must serve with respect, not with prejudice. Daniel bowed low. The two executives who had come with him trembled, hardly daring to breathe. The first-class cabin seemed to vibrate, not with the hum of the engines, but with the weight of restructuring orders delivered right here on the aircraft floor, before the eyes of those who had witnessed the truth from the very beginning. Amara stepped back half a pace, her voice dropping lower, but carrying more weight than any shouted command. And finally, Daniel, make sure today's message does not stay within these 200 passengers. I want it to echo across the entire world. Daniel Wu had not yet recovered when Amara stepped directly into the aisle, turning to face the passengers packed into first class, and even those seated in business just behind. Phones were raised high, lenses fixed on her, the cabin lights reflecting across her calm face, as if she had been preparing her whole life for this very moment. Amara drew in a slow breath and spoke, her voice carrying without a microphone, clear enough for everyone to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Amara Ellison. 3 days ago, I acquired Sky Lux Airlines, and what you have just witnessed is a cultural collapse, right here at the doorway of this cabin. There are no excuses, no justifications strong enough to cover it. You were forced to wait, pulled into a humiliating scene that never should have happened. The cabin hushed, broken only by the quickened breaths of the passengers. A middle-aged woman clutched her husband's hand tightly. A young man gave a faint nod, his eyes lit with admiration at Amara's courage. She continued, her tone low but sharp as a blade. Skylux owes you an apology, and I, as CEO, accept full responsibility on behalf of the company. But words alone are never enough. Only action can serve as a true apology. The cabin held its breath. Amara turned and gestured to Daniel. His hands trembled as he picked up the cabin microphone, his hoarse voice echoing through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, under the direct instruction of Dr. Ellison, CEO of Skylux, we are announcing the following. Every passenger on Flight 712 will receive a full refund for their purchased ticket, regardless of class. In addition, each passenger will be granted a complimentary round-trip flight of the same class, valid for 12 months. A wave of astonishment swept through the cabin, like a sudden gust of wind. Some passengers widened their eyes, a few nearly sprang from their seats. A silver-bearded gentleman could not help but break into applause. Then, scattered claps followed, spreading down the aisle, swelling into thunderous applause. Amara bowed her head slightly, one hand placed over her chest. "You have become witnesses to a painful truth, but it is because of you that this truth can no longer be hidden. I promise you this. Skylux will change, not with polished slogans, but with sweat, discipline, and a rebuilt culture. And you will be the very first to see that change take form." Her eyes swept across the rows, pausing on a woman in sunglasses, who had earlier shown annoyance when the incident first unfolded. The woman now gave a faint nod, her lips pressed tight. A small gesture, yet one heavy with acknowledgement. The second round of applause erupted, louder, longer, rolling through the business cabin as well. A few passengers even shouted out, "Bravo!" "Respect!" Amara Ellison stood tall, her face not adorned with prideful triumph, but with the calm of someone who had just taken on a monumental responsibility. She knew this was not yet victory. This was only the beginning. The cabin door opened again. This time it was not security, nor frantic executives, but an entirely new flight crew. Unfamiliar faces carrying themselves with composure, eyes clear and steady. Leading them was Marisol Vega, a 43-year-old veteran purser with her hair neatly tied back, her stride firm, and a calm, assured smile. She bowed slightly to Amara before addressing anyone else. "Dr. Ellison, it is an honor to serve you and all of our passengers today. Please rest assured, from this moment forward, this flight belongs to safety and respect." Amara gave a small nod, her eyes reflecting a glint of acknowledgement. She did not need flattery. Just by their demeanor, she knew this crew were people of discipline and dignity. Karen, Gregory, Hale, and Lila had already been escorted out. Their silhouettes disappeared beyond the jet bridge, leaving behind a heavy void in the cabin, like the hollow left by a surgical cut. Yet into that space, the new crew stepped, filling it with quiet professionalism. Marisol gestured to her team. "We apologize for the delay. We will do everything necessary to ensure your journey is safe and comfortable." Passengers who had been recording lowered their phones. Many exhaled with relief. Some allowed themselves faint smiles. The suffocating tension seemed to wash away at last. Amara sat down in seat 1A. For the first time that turbulent morning, she leaned back into the soft leather and drew a long breath. The blanket and pillow remained untouched, silent reminders of the chain of wrongs, but now they stood as symbols of justice reclaimed. The man in seat 1B, who had earlier amused himself with the unfolding drama, glanced at Amara, looking suddenly uneasy. His lips moved as if to speak, but all he managed was a quiet murmur. Wishing you a good flight." Amara tilted her head slightly, replying softly, "Thank you." The cabin door closed with a decisive click. The jet bridge pulled away from the aircraft. The wheels began to roll. The engines roared to life, this time not as a threat, but as an affirmation. The journey would continue, but with an entirely new meaning. Outside the window, the runway stretched out like a silver thread. The Boeing 737 shuddered, gathered speed, and lifted into the air. As the wheels left the ground, Amara closed her eyes. Not from exhaustion, but because at last she could release a breath she had been holding. There was no sense of triumph, no thrill of revenge, only a steadfast calm. She had cut away a malignant growth, and the path to healing had only just begun. In her heart, one thought rang clear and unshakable. Skylux must not only fly across the skies, it must fly beyond prejudice. And I will be the one to lead that flight. In the world of business, people often believe that power is displayed through grand meetings, thick contracts, or billion-dollar figures. But the story on Skylux Flight 718 reveals a different truth. Sometimes power is affirmed not by shouting, but by a calm nod, a decisive order, and a silence heavy with authority. Amara Ellison did not need to slam the table or flaunt her title. She simply allowed those who had belittled her to expose themselves. And when the truth surfaced, she turned it into a lesson not just for one flight crew, but for an entire system. That story reminds us of this. Respect is not a privilege reserved for a few. It is the minimum standard owed to everyone. An airline, a company, or any organization, if it loses that foundation, then no matter how many airplanes it owns or how many glittering offices it builds, it is nothing more than a castle built on sand. And for those who have been dismissed, excluded, or deemed unworthy, remember this. True value does not lie in the judgmental eyes of others, but in the strength you carry within your heart. The strength to stand tall, to refuse to back down, and when the moment comes, to rewrite the rules. If you believe that justice does not need to be loud, but must be decisive, hit like and subscribe to continue with us on these stories of fairness, dignity, and the moments that can change a life. And before you go, leave a comment with the simple phrase, "Respect first." Because respect must always be the starting point of every journey.